You are now listening to Out of the Blank.
So welcome to Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Joshua Herring.
Hey, how you doing, Robbie?
So you're from Virginia, very close to me. And so what do you do professionally?
Well, I'm from Virginia, though it's been a few years since I lived there. I'm down in North Carolina now, and I didn't really expect to go this route, but I've become a teacher. So I'm a high school humanities instructor down here in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Now, all right, so I do have a little bit of kind of problems, but I like the education system, but I definitely think there's some things that need to be changed. What do you do, I guess, daily basis in your, like you teach high school, right?
I do. So I teach at a pretty special school. It's called Thales Academy. We're named after a pre-Socratic philosopher. So as far as like my day to day, this year I teach an 11th grade philosophy class. I've got two sections of that. I have an 11th grade literature class. Right now we're just finishing up Shakespeare and about to launch into John Milton. Two sections of that. And then this year I've got two sections of speech and debate as an elective. And then I also advise an after-school middle school speech and debate club for one of our after-school programs.
Now,
I do a lot.
well, you said that you didn't think you were going to go this route. So this isn't something you wanted to do as a child. You didn't want to teach other minds.
No. I was homeschooled up through ninth grade, and I went to a private school from 10th through 12th grade. Coming right out of college, going into teaching was not anything I was looking for. I actually came down to North Carolina in part because I was heading into Southeastern Seminary for thinking I was headed to go be a pastor at a church somewhere. And along the way, I took a job teaching at Thales and discovered that I love teaching. And at least a lot of my students and some parents and my administrators keep telling me I'm pretty good at it. And they keep offering me contracts each year. So I've stuck around. And I eventually finished up a Master's of Divinity degree and decided that I was really in teaching for the long haul. So that's not what I expected to do, but I kind of fell into it.
Do you found it that like you wouldn't want to teach younger kids, like the small ones that are going to like the minds that really you could shape? How hard is it for you to teach 11th grade? Because I mean, I know what I was doing in 11th grade. I was either smoking pot or I was on my phone. So the whole idea, I was not paying attention. I actually didn't even really receive good education until college, I guess. I had very few teachers that ever took time into me because I have ADHD. So right there, you're already seen as a problem in the classroom, especially with trying to pay attention. So very few teachers would just send me out and I would just act out to get sent out because there was no point in, if nobody was going to truly give me the time or take the time for me to learn anything, then there was no point in me even being there. It was just a waste of time. Somewhere my parents could send me for 8 hours.
Well, see, that's those are several of the reasons that I'm teaching in the kind of school that I'm in. I mean, I have great respect for the many wonderful teachers who teach in public schools, but as part of the problem of teaching in public school, they have to deal with a lot of stuff that we simply don't deal with, and so. There's, I don't know if you're familiar with something called IEPs or individual education plans, but
Yeah.
that's a formal plan where teachers have to accommodate things that a school psychiatrist or a principal has said this child needs these accommodations. We don't do any of that. What we do instead is focus on the needs of each individual student that comes to our classroom. So I have plenty of kids who have been diagnosed with various things. Some of them we know about and their parents have disclosed. Others of them we simply don't know about as teachers, because that's part of the private school world, is that often we simply don't know what other people have diagnosed our students with. In the same way that a public school teacher, they usually get fat folders for their students, and they're like they have to figure out all this stuff. We don't have to deal with a lot of that. We do, of course, have real students, and they come with all kinds of interesting quirks. So part of at least the approach I take when dealing with students who have ADD or ADHD or various things, I mean, I don't know how many of my kids have been, I find out over a course of a year that what I thought was just some simple problem of not getting enough sleep is really not getting enough sleep because Thursday night, this kid's at mom's house, Friday night, the kid's at dad's house, and the homework's at one place and the iPad's at the other. And it just, all of this stuff that once I know a bit more about their background, it just kind of breaks my heart to know what some of these kids are really going through.
It sounds like your humanities degree should turn into a psychology degree. The reason why I even went to school to study psychology was I had a fascination with the human mind, mostly because of what can afflict it, whether it's from your past, whether it's your environmental issues or something of this sort. It seems it turns the person into who they are today. And humanities, that actually might be something I might want to dive into furthering my education, because I'm telling you, I have a fascination with society. I mean, I look around, I'm like, why aren't people talking to one another anymore? Why is everyone so closed off? We're in a pushback world. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I mean I'm fascinated by that same phenomenon. I mean, and you mentioned being on your phone a lot in high school. I mean, I see the same thing. It's one of the reasons I'm really grateful. We have a pretty strong no cell phone during the school day policy. So that's just one of the ways we deal with that. But I think there's something about modern technology and the contemporary way people live that we're often very isolated from each other, and we don't take the time to get to know neighbors or spend as much time with the people right around us. Usually, instead, we're involved in maybe 100 different conversations across Messenger or text messages or Twitter or Instagram that are really only possible through a digital medium. But instead, we're really sacrificing the actual encounter with a real person so that we can be in contact with all these people over digital interfaces. So I think we have a lot of problems in terms of that kind of isolation.
I
Uh,
think
I
I
personally find psychology to be as helpful with that as other disciplines. But
I think you have a you have a comfortability factor with your personality. Like just being able to talk and level with like the way you're talking to me is a respect type of talk. That's the fact, and like you're not saying sir, but you're talking to me like I'm your equal. You know, a lot of teachers see themselves in higher regard, at least where I'm from and what I was dealing with in my school system, where they seemed like they knew they were better than the kid. And that immediately, I have a problem with authority. I'm like, all right, man, like I know you got a degree and all these PhDs, whatever you want to call it, but I'm not into being told what to do. You know, I didn't actually get a fascination until with Shakespeare and the old style literature until after I graduated high school and I went to a thrift store and bought one for 5 cents. It was William Shakespeare's, one of his
nice.
playwrights, and that's what I literally held my little podcast recorder. I held that on top of the Shakespeare book. I'm like, we're narrating on top of Shakespeare right now. And it's like, then I decided, why don't I read into it? And seeing all the fascination, like, diving more into plays and diving more into reading, I was like, why did I not find this fascinating in school? And I was like, wait a minute, because they were forcing me to do this. I was like, I needed to go and venture off into this program myself. I find if you take, how many years you've been teaching school?
So this is my seventh year.
So like you've probably seen it change in a drastic way, at least taking more time with students and being a little bit more beneficial. I started noticing, like, I podcasted with my third grade teacher, was one of the very few teachers, one of so many. I've only had three that have ever really taken the time into me. And she saw I had ADHD. She would do these types of adaptations to the class where like put eraser caps on my pencils so I could drum on the desk and do these types of things that she saw, like just get the kid's energy out and he'll be able to focus. You know
And
what I mean?
so, well, I'll put it this way. You probably would not like my class then, because I mean, I don't do those sorts of things. What I do instead is I tend to uh, recognize, I have the conviction that there are some basic things that everybody does have to be able to do and have to be able to know. And part of the reason that I'm teaching is because I think in order to be an educated human being, you need to know the things that we're teaching. So I don't have anything that I don't think like, oh, well, this is just a silly thing we just have to do. I think everything I'm teaching is vital. So it's important for all the
Yeah.
students to know that. But then there's also part of it that, I mean, we have a pretty strong, and again, one of the things I like about my school is that we have a pretty strong discipline system where there are some basic behavioral things that everybody's held to the same level of. So, and it gets a little different for every classroom, and every student is a little bit different. I've had students who have kind of quirky things and they need some slight adaptations to the system. But in general, I'm looking for students who are working hard and who are paying attention in class and are listening. And I'm going to do everything I can to give them all the tools they need for success. But I'm also, I mean, I think there's a huge part of education. It's got this weird relationship with authority, because on the one hand, there is a difference between teacher and student. I mean, the teacher does already know the material that the student is hopefully encountering for the first time. And if the teacher does his job right, he's actually studying the material with the student. And it's a common journey together. But it has this weird dynamic where you actually do have to recognize, oh, yeah, the teacher does know what he's talking about, and I'm going to learn from him. But if that's done in a respectful way, then it doesn't demean the humanity of the student either. And it's not the sort of oppressive, oh, you must listen to me because I am the expert. Nobody likes that.
Yeah,
But if
well,
it,
I
but
think
it
with each teacher, they have to adapt to their own curriculum. Like you have a set of standards, obviously rules you have to go by. You have a certain thing you have to teach. Like this is your core lesson for the day or core lesson for the year that you have to make sure these kids learn. But you adapt it into your own, whether it's going outside and then learning outside and in the environment, or just enjoying like having those. I guess if you adapt it and make it your own, it's a lot better than where it seems super, super structured. And sometimes that works for depending on the teacher. But I feel like a lot nowadays, like especially with how our kids' attention spans are like off to the next thing, especially with just so many devices, like they're already worried about what the Snapchat they're getting 10 minutes from now, when you're teaching, then sometimes you can see eyes a little bit disconnect. And it's hard for, I would say, a teacher to try and get that kid to reconnect into it. And I think what makes a really good teacher is being able to be like, look, we're here to learn this. It's something you have to do. You can't just look at the people that want to learn it and only focus on them. You have to try and incorporate everyone. Like, hey, we do need to make this like something that you're interested in too. I'm not forcing you to learn it, but you're in my class for an hour and a half. I just can't have you sitting in the back drooling on the desk. Yet, whether it's playing a game and then incorporating like trivia into the like curriculum or something, that makes it fun. And like for me, someone that's not like I can read very well. I don't like to read though. Like I have to force myself to read a book. But if you tell me, like my teacher would always, me and my buddy sat right next to each other in class. And this was my 11th grade year in US history. And he would never let me work together with him because I would always just sit there in the back class like, yeah, let me copy your stuff. Like, because he was smarter than me. I was like, might as well. And he left me sitting there the whole entire time doing it the whole year. And then at the last day of the year, he let me work with him. I was beating chapters, writing down the words faster than my buddy was. He was like, where'd you find that? I was like, it's right here on this chapter. I was like, I was like, I'll show you I can work with him if you let me work with him. And I did it. And then I was like, you just tricked me to get my work done. He's like, exactly. But you did it. And now you have the tools and the skill to do it. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I see that now. And actually it bolstered me to go even farther into actually trying to be more of take hold of things. And I was like, you have a teacher like that? I was like, that's someone that changes so much stuff, especially when your students are going to leave you in a few months, and then you're going to have to teach a whole new class. Like you have to refresh.
I mean, that's one of the that's one of the fun things about teaching. I mean, in one sense, every day is an opportunity to impact students and to help change them into the people that they're trying to become. In another sense, I mean, there each year you get there's a rotation through. And then I tend to teach different subjects. So every year I've got a different set of classes that I'm teaching. And I've taught all over our humanities curriculum across grades 6 through 12. And every year it's a new group of students. It's a new classroom dynamic. It's a new set of of content that I'm working kids through. And it keeps the whole class always fresh, always revitalized. And I always find a lot of joy in having my classes be as dialogue based as possible. I end up lecturing probably about somewhere between 25 to 50% of the time, where the other 25 to 50% should be spent on students either working with the material in some way, because I think students learn best when through self-discovery, but also through having a class conversation. We use a particular pedagogy called Socratic seminar, where we have a circle discussion based on a particular text, and where it's really, when it's done right, when we've got the right structure in place, everybody knows how to be generally polite, such that we can have strong disagreement in a conversation without actually offending each other. It helps the students discover what's going on in a given text rather than me simply explaining it. And it forces them to wrestle with the text, which I find to be one of the most helpful things. And I learn more from those discussions, I think, sometimes than my kids do.
Oh, you feel like kind of like not I wouldn't say throwing them in the deep end, but like, hey, like, you got to swim for
Oh,
yourself
we
here too.
live in the deep end in my classes. I mean, there's no point in staying in the shallow end of stuff. We gotta.
You have to venture forth and discover what you can truly master on your own. I mean, if a teacher's just giving you the answers and putting the answers up on the thing, that's what you want, but that's not what you need. You need something where you need to go and grab hold of something, because you know what that creates later down the road when you start giving everybody the answers. They expect that in everyday life. You know, I think, with my opinion on what school systems should be teaching, I think it should look at the basic elements. Obviously teach those history, you need to know this types of stuff, but find where the kid's true fascination is too. Don't give a kid calculus if he likes workshop and he's good with his hands. I sucked at math. My school system ended up forgetting about me. I kind of shot under the radar. And
Hmm.
I mean, I had so many smart tricks, dude. My parents moved all the time and they always changed phone numbers. So the school system never had my parents' phone number. So I just gave them mine. I was like, it's 443-783. Yeah, I'm not going to say the rest of it. I just realized we're on a podcast. But like,
Got a
like
good podcast too.
it's like it's like I don't want to be in trouble because I'm not doing my work. And when I did that, they were calling me. I just wouldn't pick up. I just was like, nah, screw it, and like not answer. And then next thing I know, they're sending report cards home. They're giving it to me to give to my parents, and I would just forget it in my book bag. And next thing you know, like my parents would be like, I don't understand you. We never get a note home. I'm like, well, I mean, like really? Like no teacher tried to contact you? You never saw a report card? You never asked? I mean, they work two jobs, so it's understandable, like stress environment. But it's like I had a lack of a belief in me, considering that when I was in kindergarten, I thought I was mentally disabled because ADHD wasn't as prevalent as it is today, where we're seeing it more and more. Like more kids are suffering from some type of mental affliction. Where my school shoved me in a room literally with a window, just like this little box window. Like they shoved me in there, and it was it was all white room. It actually ended up getting turned into a bathroom. And I used to preach this story on my podcast. Like, how could they just sit there to make sure I was still in there? Like, there's no phones. I was just staring at a blank piece of paper because they thought I just couldn't handle a classroom situation. And I was saying it to this one guy I had on my podcast. His name's Jared Johnson. He goes, and then he starts saying what was in the room. I was like, yeah, it's exactly. He's like finishing up before I could say it. He goes, dude, you're a year ahead of my little brother. We both were. And
Oh,
that was his room. He goes, my brother's mentally disabled, and they put my brother in that room. And my parents fought to get that room taken away, and they ended up turning it into a bathroom. I was like, somebody, evidence right there. And I'm like, there's schools that do that all the time. They just give up.
I read this is probably about a year ago. There's a website I follow pretty regularly. It's called the Federalist. One of my friends who writes them, her name's Joy Pullman. She had this great article about one of the problems with public education model is really that you get a lot of problems when you try to put anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 students in a single building. So, educational philosophy aside, just on the structural necessities of that many people crammed into a single building for 8 hours a day, you're really creating all kinds of additional problems. And I hadn't really thought about it in those terms before, but when you put that many people together, and I mean, on the other side of it, from a teacher's point of view, and I've never done administration, but I can at least imagine from the administration's point of view, you've got maybe, say, 40 to 60 teachers who are monitoring anywhere from 1,000 to, say, 2,000 students in 8 hours a day. They're always outnumbered, and they're always overworked, and they're always looking for how do they accomplish their goals and their job requirements. And then administration is concerned where there's maybe between 1 and 10 people in admin on a given school, and they're responsible for all the students and any parent, with apparently your parents as the exception since you scammed them with the phone number. But really, realistically, any
Scam or
parent can
outsmarted this
reach
person.
out to admin to complain. And very few parents have positive things to say when they talk to the principal. I mean, it's usually some horrible complaint. Well, I mean, so when you've got a room of 32 kids and one student is just not with the program, well, from the teacher's point of view and from administration's point of view, you got to just focus on the 31. And I mean, I think that's where I think really looking at that scenario, it says to me we need a different system. The public education system as is simply it's not working. And the idea that we can have a single educational model that is the default for everyone in a community is really insufficient. It just, and again, that's just on the level of logistics. We're not even getting into the purpose of education or what's it good for or what exactly should we require every American citizen age 5 to 18 to study. I mean, just on the logistics of we're going to cram everyone into this building and make them all do the exact same thing, that's a mistake, I think.
You're creating a hive society. You're creating more people to act just like how we're doing today in the world, where we're just walking around being just like Jim that works the 9 to 5. You
Well,
know,
your high school, your middle school and high school students are freed from the very pressures that you and I both know. I know you told me earlier you were coming home from work in order to do this podcast, so you're doing this podcast as a side gig of some sort.
yeah,
But that means at the very least, for whatever awful social habits you or I might have, we're constrained by economic reality. At the end of the day, we have bills that we have to pay. So we have to have some level of get out of bed and go to work in order to pay the bills. But when you're talking about kids who are put together in a school environment, they are by and large, most of them are freed from the economic realities that adults are faced with. So there's a lack
for
of any
sure.
kind of moral concern at the very basic level of moral agreement. We can all agree that we're trying to get by in terms of paycheck, but 12-year-olds don't have that. And my goodness, nobody's meaner than a pack of 12-year-old kids. I mean,
Their problems are more immediate than what ours are. Ours is like, oh my God, if I don't pay my bills this week or whatever, they're going to take my car. They're going, it's all stuff that's coming down the road. Because I think, especially when you get out of high school, you start to realize what paying for your own car, working and doing all this stuff is, and you realize the benefit of like, oh shit, my parents kept me from the real world. I also wish they would have taught me how to balance a checkbook and do all these things in school, which they didn't. But I think like I have to fight both sides on this. My powerful point of view where I'm like, it really sucked that I was not given there was very few people that gave me the chance that I needed. Most of the teachers were quick to send me out, but I also see it from their side too, that they have a large amount of students to try and teach at once. And especially like the school districts in my area, they're like, I went to vocational school, which is a trade school. I did HVAC for a little bit because I like working with my hands. I didn't like sitting down for a little while. Now, I
we
also
just
did it.
replaced our HVAC last summer, and I learned so much more about air conditioning, and I am so grateful for people who know how to make AC systems work.
I had no plan to do it after I graduated. I didn't want to get a job in it. It was just something like, what are you doing? Like they tell you, oh, I'm in school. It's the reason why a lot of people go to college. Oh, I'm in college. And then it's like, once you get your degree, it's like, then what are you doing with your degree? It's like, I might go and further my education. It's like, you've been in college for 9 years, bro. You're not Van Wilder. You can't keep that going on. It's like a safeguard for what people ask you when you don't know what you want to be. I took HVAC because I didn't want to take Spanish. That sucked because I worked at a hotel now. And let me tell you, I work with an all Hispanic staff. And I wish I knew some Spanish because I can get cussed out in so many different words. But I was like, well, I never took the time to do that. So I have to further it on my own. But my buddy took HVAC and he does it now, makes $20 an hour. And he's like, just bank all the time, like buys just random. He has like 6 cars. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you only drive one. He goes, yeah, but I like looking at them. I was like, get a Hot Wheels, put it on the desk. Okay. You don't need to buy a Escalade.
6 cars on $20 an hour. That's impressive. I don't know how
He works every single day, gets paid overtime. This kid, me and him, like, we're the exception to the new generation that does not go out and party. We choose to kind of be comfortable. And also, like, we don't see drinking as a big thing. So we just mostly spend time at home doing other things, either podcasts and whatever. And it's weird because I see the education system as so much of a detriment, but I also see it as a benefit because it helps you, like public schools help you become more cultural with other people around you, which is a major benefit. I think you need to be established at a young age that there are other people that don't look like you, and you need to understand they're people too. But I find it really weird where the education system takes it. And I think it shows a lot about human nature, where there's social groups, and those social groups people get confined to just on the basis of what people look like. I can tell you right now, I have been a minority in places before. I'm a minority at work. Been a minority in classrooms before. I've never felt uncomfortable as a minority. And I have a choice to go to a school that is an all black school, and I choose to go there than the all white school that has literally a Starbucks on the campus, only because I never felt uncomfortable. And the fact whatever the advisor was like, you can go to this school where they'll pay you, or you can go to this school where you'll have to pay a little bit, but you'll be more comfortable. As soon as she said comfortable, I was like, what do you mean by comfortable? Well, you'd be a minority at this school, so they'd be paying you. I'm like, then send me there. I don't care about the money. I care about the experience, man. I need to understand why I would be uncomfortable with that. I would walk down the halls and end up standing by myself because of the fact that you just see everybody. There's the nerds, there's the goths, there's the all athletic kids. Or it's like, where's we had a redneck row. I'm like, you're already labeling people before we even hit the real world yet. Like, you don't understand that sport that you're playing right now is not going to matter unless you take it farther in your life, which you're not doing. You're caring about what the party's going on tonight. It's like, you're not going to understand, like, you got to work 2 jobs. You got to work another job. You got to survive if you're not going to find something you're truly passionate about.
So I think that's one part of what education's for. I don't really know that really gets to the heart of why education matters, because there's a sense in which you don't really need school to have that realization that all these other people are people. But I think so I at least subscribe to kind of an older idea about like why this whole school thing matters. And it's my favorite version of this at least goes with the metaphor of chains, that we're all actually chained by ignorance and we're restrained by ignorance. And the unfortunate part about if you're literally restrained by chains or handcuffs or something, you know that you're in trouble. You know that you need to get free. The problem with being restrained by ignorance is that most of the time we don't actually know that we're ignorant of something. Until I'm hit in the face with the fact that I don't know how to do calculus or geometry or algebra or even simple addition, I don't necessarily feel the lack until suddenly I get my W-2s and my 1040 back from the IRS. They say, you did your math wrong. Fix it, or we'll take all of your money. Suddenly I realize, wow, I need math a lot more. My ignorance is revealed here in that scenario, and so on. But really what I think education is all about is actually freeing us from ignorance. And it's freeing us to really fulfill our human potential. Now, a lot of the ways that we set up education make that possible. I mean, I think even in the worst kind of school environment, you still have teachers who are looking to help students be freed from ignorance in these particular disciplines and kinds of knowledge. But a lot of the ways that we've structured it make that more kind of, well, maybe that'll happen, rather than really focusing on that freedom from ignorance as the main goal. And then of course, you've got the other, I think there's a necessary virtue or moral aspect to education as well. Because once you've got this freedom, then I think every human being, especially in the Western world, where we have a pretty amazing level of financial affluence, your buddy with 6 cars on $20 an hour, as one example, or you and I with the time that we actually we can both have a podcast that's not, I assume my podcast hasn't really made any money yet. I hope yours is making tons of money, but
I've been offered, but it's just a passion, not a job.
Yeah, these things don't really make tons of money, but we have the ability to still do them, even if they're not making huge amounts of money. The big question then becomes, once you've got your freedom, what's it for? How do you live? What are we supposed to do with our lives? I mean, I think those are the questions that education should equip people to answer. And that's why I think it matters. I mean, like, it's not so much, in my mind, it's not so much about the social groups or the dynamics. It part of that kind of freedom is recognizing humanity is way broader than my personal experience of it. In my case, a Southern American experience of it. I've got a friend from India who grew up in Northern India. And in his case, part of his experience was learning, oh, wow, the world is different. Another buddy who grew up as a trust fund kid out of Southern California, and he's still a fascinating guy, but just suddenly realizing, wow, not everybody grows up having like millions of dollars they're going to inherit.
Well, everyone's not Bill Gates'
so
kid.
much more.
But focusing, like, you're talking about people and then turning out who they're going to be, who they want to become, who they truly aspire to be. In my system or education system, it was structured, and even if you wanted to go pursue something, you could, but you didn't get the time you really needed for it. I think it's a good idea to have structured stuff, but when it comes to teaching calculus, I do not see where it's going to help me in my everyday life. At least I haven't used it today. I actually don't even know it. I only took algebra 1, but I'm not good at math, so I know I'm not going to be a math teacher. I still want to know the basic necessities of, I have this amount of money in the bank. If I deposit this, I'm going to have this much more money. And then if I also spend on this and I subtract for that, and then also gas, also groceries, that is majorly beneficial that everyone should know. But then my education system, I decided like when they get to let you pick your classes, like your electives, whatever you want to do,
Mhm.
Greek mythology. I said,
Oh,
that sounds interesting. I've always liked Percy Jackson books. Like, that's a book I could actually read. And I dived deep into the realm of Greek mythology. I memorized all the gods. I have a fascination every time Clash of the Titans pops up on the freaking TV screen. I'm like, what's up? There we go. And I find it awesome because I, I I was only taught this for a very short amount of time. It was only like a quick, like, brief little bit of thing in our American literature class. Like, it was only like a 2-week period where I was learning about Greek mythology, where I ended up going discovering it on my own, where I thought one day I might want to be like a philosopher or try and decipher some things of this sort. I wanted to go to school for philosophy, but I was like, then I started diving into, why is everyone a little bit different from me? And I was like, like, just what we're interested in, not looks basis, but why does that kid, like, having a really rough home life, and he's also kind of displaying it in class, being mean to others? And that's where I found a fascination with the human mind.
okay. Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, that too is what I mean. That's really that that ability to then go on and figure out, oh, this is what I'm interested in, and now I want to learn about it. I mean, I think that's one of the outgrowths of. I mean, the view of education I follow and subscribe to is called the liberal arts model of education. It's that idea of gaining these arts that bring men freedom, so that you are able to learn ultimately what you either think is important or what you want to learn about, and that all these different subjects in school are really ways of whether we ever need those knowledges or not. Part of me wants to. I agree with you about the functional uselessness of higher math. I don't use algebra 1 or 2 or pre-calculus. I do use geometry anytime I need to cut wood, or anytime I need to, like, repair anything in my house. I have a leaky the sink under my kitchen sink. I put the kitchen sink in a couple years ago, and I messed up some of the plumbing work. And if I had been better on my angles, I would have had less trouble with the pipes. But a lot of math is practically useless. It's theoretically gorgeous and beautiful and wonderful, but in terms of utility, it's not very helpful. But work going through the paces is really instrumental in teaching people how to learn. As a side note, I too, I'm excited that you found a passion for Greek mythology. That's all. That's really fun. That's one of my favorite. We do Greek mythology and Greek literature in our ninth grade literature sequence, and I've loved teaching that class for a couple years now.
Do you play video games a little bit?
I don't. I did a tab in high school. Uh, Age of Empires and Civilization were computer.
That's what I thought, because I was about to say, because I play like some old school history type games, like a little bit of Assassin's Creed, where that's where I found my fascination with Leonardo da Vinci, because they incorporated him in that game, and then I was learning about him at the same time in school. I was like, oh, no, everyone calls him an idiot, but let me tell you something, yo, he helped this one guy assassinate this one dude, and then, like, in my mind I'm getting the fake history, then I go and read the real history. I'm like, holy shit. Like, he's actually one of my favorite. Like, if I had 4 kids, I'd name them obviously after the Ninja Turtles, mostly because the names are badass. But then I started getting a fascination with folklore, mythology. I was like, there's so much weird things that, like, was
Yeah.
back in our history time. How everything that we basically have in America today, a lot of it is from Greek and Roman influence. like our bathrooms. Like, oh my God, when I go and take a shit, that's from some dude in like back in the Greek days was like, wait, we're crapping in funnel systems. We're doing what now? Let's build a system for this, an irrigation system. And that all happened, and that's from the Romans, not even the Greeks.
I was just saying, the Romans were the Greeks were your philosophy guys. They were
Yeah.
over there sitting and thinking,
Aristotle, man.
yeah, that's it. And for the Greeks, the big thing was that you can't ever go test your theory. That's what slaves do. Free men just sit and think. Well, the Romans are like, yeah, nobody's got time for that. We're going to go dig
We're gonna rip our shirts off and
trenches and lay some pipes and go
Sparta.
take over places.
It's Sparta. Like kicks. Like I saw that movie and I was like, all right,
yeah.
this is badass. I need to look up into more into it. And then a game I found a fascination with was the newest Assassin's Creed that came out because it took place in the Greek and Roman eras. You get to be a gladiator and you get to go explore. You get to work with Aristotle. A lot of people don't know who he is, famous Greek philosopher, and he's the one that brought so much of like comedy, drama, all those arts, that whole thing that you see in movies. That's from that guy. He was preaching back then. He had a fascination with words that people are like, whoa, he's such a good public speaker. And like he was able to say things and captivate audiences. Then you have Plato. You know, you have all these amazing anomalies in history where I look back, I'm like, creativity is lacking today because back in the day, there were so many innovators. And I feel like now people are supposed to act a certain way, so supposed to dress a certain way, supposed to look a certain way. You're supposed to have a six pack. You can't have a dad bod, that whole type thing. You're looking up to unrealistic expectations, and then you feel unsatisfied that you'll never achieve them. They're not achievable because there so much things in technology today influences that. When back in the day, that you saw the movie 300, they weren't that ripped. Spartans weren't that ripped. They had normal bodies. You see the Greek statues, none of them were that ripped. They were the sculpture would make it like that to improve their physique, to make them look godly. You know what I mean?
They were communicating the beauty of the gods through the human sculpture. They were idealizing the form. One thing to keep in mind if you're thinking about the ancients, I mean, is that the ones that have survived through the historical narrative, I mean, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, just to name those three as three of the most famous of the ancient philosophers, those are three names that I suspect a lot of people today know. And most folks who've made it through college at one level or another have read a little bit, at least read a little bit somewhere along the way from Plato or Aristotle. Even if it's just a bit in Plato's Republic about the allegory of the cave, or Aristotle's idea of three forms of government. You've got the government by one, government by few, and government by the people. But those were, Plato and Aristotle were two guys out of literally millions of ancient Greeks. So they're the ones whose names are famous and that we know. The average Greek did not leave a record behind. So I think when you're saying that we're not as creative, I don't know that that's true. I think what we end up with today is that we actually have contemporary technology has allowed normal people to rise to a level of creativity literally impossible in a previous era.
So you're saying it took a different form.
Ages or the antiquity, they didn't have the resources to do anything. They're literally out there. They're subsistence farmers for most of human history.
Yeah.
Today, we've got enough free capital and leisure time created that ordinary people can do some pretty extraordinary things. And we've got a basic level of literacy and knowledge established in the United States and most of the Western world that really, it's not as if people are generally ignorant. That doesn't mean everybody's smart and everybody's right in what they think about, but that generally people have the intellectual tools to go out and make something new or make something that they want, build their own business. I've been watching a lot of Shark Tank lately, and all this has been kind of on my mind. It's like ordinary people can go out and start this now $10 million business 3 years later. It's kind of crazy. That would never have happened in 2000 BC.
Yeah, well, I also think if you look at the Greeks, they had that population, like all of not just a specific few people being so gifted and talented, but just because they left a record behind, but most of them, like they were all pretty special. I think it's because they were more cultured. I think back in the day, if you look at that, like that's just because there wasn't these distractions and comfortability things that we consider today, such as
More.
technology that keeps us closed off.
For ancient Greece, I think it's important to also keep in mind that for every one person who can just like sit around and be cultured, write a play, perform in a play, go watch a play, for example, you have hundreds of slaves for every person who is free enough to be cultured. I mean, the Greek civilization, and I don't want to go down too far of a progressive rabbit hole and say that's why the Greeks are bad, but I also don't want to ignore the fact that in Greek civilization, women have zero agency or recognition of being people. Women existed in order to have babies and manage and basically be property. And the wealthy class existed in ancient Greece because they have all the slaves doing all the work. I mean,
Well,
that's.
I'm not saying that slavery is a good thing. I'm saying
Oh, I know you're not.
what
I'm
I'm
just saying
focusing
that's
on
all.
is more of the arts program where people are a little bit more open to exploring, I guess, their mind a little bit because you had to kind of survive. I think survival has become so easy nowadays, where we could just go to the grocery store where back in the day you had to hunt to get what you needed. Like you had to actually get up off your ass. You didn't have Netflix to, you couldn't Uber Eats, bro. You couldn't Uber Eats. Aristotle could not Uber eat a Chinese takeout to his house. He
All
had to
right.
go.
True story. We discovered a few weeks ago that we've got some high school kids that are literally ordering pizzas and lunch over Uber Eats while from their school issued iPads.
So many. Oh my God. There's three things I need to bring up in this one. One, why are
Ooh.
you skipping out on school pizza, bro?
Oh,
That
we
is
don't
better than the pizza you can get anywhere.
we don't provide lunch for people.
Are you serious?
Yeah, we don't do that. That costs money.
Hold on, hold on, hold on. You let kids go hungry?
No, that's just not our job. We're a private school, man.
Oh shit, you're private school. Oh God, that's
Oh yeah, everything I've been talking about is from a private school point of view. We
oh
don't do,
God.
and it's one of
Yeah,
our
okay,
biggest
that
cost
changes
overhead.
everything then. All right, shit. Well, I think the whole factor is like my whole thinking of like being publicly school. I'm not saying private schools are bad, obviously not, but like public school, like I've witnessed days where kids are sharing lunches with each other because the one
Oh, yeah.
kid didn't have money and didn't have the thing
But
and didn't
I
have
mean,
the school plan set up and he's starving. Like you know what starvation is like? Like that fucking hurts.
well, I mean that's literally not something we deal with at my school because every student who's there is from a family that can afford to pay $6,000 a year for tuition. So where our school exists at this spot in the market, we're not. I mean, so private education on the upper end in our area, we've got schools that are charging more than $20,000 a year for K-12.
Yeah.
We don't do that. We're at 5,400 for kindergarten through fifth grade and $6,000 a year tuition. So the students that are there, I mean, at my school at least, they can all afford to eat. They can all bring lunch. They're not in a starvation deal.
Yeah, you're
Now,
coming from a different perspective than I guess what I was thinking
so.
of with
Yeah,
the
yeah,
X.
we've been sort of on slightly different sides of the school in question.
I mean, it's not. It's like I said. Like it's conversation. It's actually I'm a little bit learning a lot. I'm learning a lot more about the private school system. But like my background comes from the public education system,
Sure.
where you can now see my perspective with the whole thing, with like kind of feeling a little bit left out. But at the same time, like it was hard. Like I would see kids sharing lunch and them going starving. Like that's obviously something you don't see on a day-to-day basis, mostly because the kids can afford to go. But like it was hard watching. I saw kids like they were showing up with the same clothes over and over again, like not washing, smelling a little bit because they had no money. They came from nothing, and then they like getting that free lunch. I think that's everything a public school should do because there are families that are less unfortunate out there. I think also you have to take into the perspective that they might have had things happen in their life where they had to leave school. They couldn't graduate. They couldn't get the diploma, whether it was like my grandfather who had to go off into the war, or he had to then go get sent back home because his dad died, and then he had to run the whole family, like take care of his little sisters, little brothers and stuff. He didn't have, like, he's had to work his ass off every single day just to get what he has now. But then you see families like, oh, they're going to want to be a rapper, and then they go and leave the school system. Next thing you know, they're working 3 jobs, and like 2 of them are like 2 shifts at McDonald's. Like, they're not happy and their kid's not doing well. That's kind of their fault, because they ended up, I'm not saying don't pursue your dream if you want to be a rapper, but realistically thinking, you also need to have a fallback plan too. Like, so many kids in my school system, like, well, when I was in school system, we're all about starting and trying to become the next big thing because that was the hottest trend. I was like, but trends change.
Well, and the one thing I mean that's pretty common, I think, across whether you're talking public school or private school. I think I've got students who are convinced they're going to be NBA stars, or they're going to be picked up by a pro baseball team, or they're going to become the next big rap or pop star, Nelly or Taylor Swift. Take your
Michael
pick.
Jordan.
Yep. Well, and one of the things I'm always excited to, I at least, part of my role, I see it at least, is a little, not dashing dreams, but a little bit of raining on parades.
Realism.
Students should recognize. I mean, one of my friends is a lot better with the numbers than I am, but he actually he had the stats. It's something like 1 out of 6,000 people who are trying out to get into the NBA actually make it. So that's not, you might be the 1 in 6,000, but hopefully we don't play the lottery expecting to win and risking this month's rent on winning. We don't make life vocation decisions based on being 1 in 6,000. We need some better career path than that. So, I mean, that's, I think I see kids with that kind of desire all the time. And I don't think it's a healthy move.
It's definitely not. Like, you don't want to think that you can drop out of school, because I know so many kids have dropped out of school thinking they're going to start a next fire mixtape, and then they end up having to go get like their GED or something just to be able to get a really sustainable job. Like, they have to, because they can't get the diploma anymore from high school, and like, you need that at least. And now even a college diploma is sometimes not enough to really get you a really good career. Like, back in the day, if you had just an associate's degree, you would be like, oh, we're hiring you. You want $35 an hour? Sure, we'll take you. Now it's like, oh yeah, well, I got a list of other people that have an associate's degree. You don't have a bachelor's yet? I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I went to school, worked my ass off. I have an associate's degree, but I don't have a bachelor's. Okay, well, how far do I going to keep going? By the time I get my bachelor's, I guarantee you a master's is going to be the only thing that's acceptable. Then even after a master's, what's next? Like, is there a God degree? Can I just be God of education? And I'm like, it's true though, because the world influences us in so many ways. It impacts our mind, impacts our lives, and impacts everything we want to do. The statistics, like, I come from a music town. Like, it's a popular tourist attraction. There's bars like on every street. Everyone here is a musician, basically. I'm literally the only one in my whole entire family that doesn't play an instrument. Just because I played it, it's not my cup of tea. I'm sorry. Everyone in my family's in bands. I've had this whole influence my whole entire life. And it was like, if I stuck to that, would I be a mindless drone or just following what my family wanted to do? It's like, but even then, they're not like on the news. They're not Luke Bryan. They're not whoever, whatever artist you want to talk about. It's like, I'm not belittling their band, but I'm saying, like, it's popular in our area. People know who they are and like to listen to them. But it's like, you can only go so far with the tools you have. Sometimes it's not fit for you. It's 1 point out of like 500 million people that want to aspire to do something, whether it's either TV or some type of entertainment, that there's like it's 6,000 people that actually make it. And then that's only like, I guess, minor leagues, you would call it. And then above that, to get into majors is like one in every 100 or something. I'm like, that brings you to like a 6% chance that you're actually going to aspire to be anything, and you're going to sell all your belongings and move to California and test it out. Like, passion to you. I'm not trying to kill your drive, but don't you think you should have a fallback plan it too in case it doesn't work out? Like, you should at least know how much money you got in your wallet and how to do math to make sure you can survive off living in California.
So a few months back, the debate league that my school started, it's called the Luddy Debate League. We partner with the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation to run a debate league amongst our schools. We've got our founder started 3 schools, and we've got between the 3 schools, I think something like 11 campuses now. Thales Academy, Franklin Academy, and St. Thomas More Academy. Anyway, one of the resolutions that we were looking at was resolved the cost of college outweigh no the benefits of the benefits of a 4-year bachelor's degree outweigh the cost to students and their families. So we spent 2 months really kind of digging deep into research on my podcast called What's the Res. We ended up doing a series of episodes focusing on that, and I learned so much about that particular topic as researching the resolution. One of my favorite episodes we did, we interviewed a lady named Hannah Frankman. She works with a group called Praxis. Have you heard of this one? Yeah, Praxis they're relatively small, but they're growing. They are they're looking to take people who have finished high school and aren't sure about college, and they want to put them into an apprenticeship program, a 12-month apprenticeship program with where the first 6 months is job training and basic skills, and then the second 6 months is an internship with one of the companies that partners with Praxis. And here's the fascinating thing: it does cost money to do the Praxis program, cost about $2,000. But then when you get your internship, that's a paid internship that you end up making about $12,000. Or I'm getting numbers wrong. I think it's $12,000 for the program, and you make $15,000 on the internship. But your money, actually, you make back the cost of the program in doing this internship. And they have something like 98% of the people that finish their program get offered an entry-level position at roughly age 18 or 19 in one of these companies. I found it absolutely fascinating because there are so many options. Because I think college can be a great thing if you're the sort of person who actually enjoys what college is really all about. If you want to go and study some important question, how do people think? What is the human mind exactly? How has human society changed over the centuries? Those are questions that college can be really helpful with studying. But if you want to go to college, just basically drink for 4 years and participate in all kinds of really things that are going to lead to really awful consequences later on in life.
You get what you pay for.
Well, yeah, but why would you go into debt for that? I mean, why would you borrow like $200,000 in order to go have a 4-year blackout? That doesn't make any sense to me.
It freaks me out because I've heard so many people talk about like with their college years, like, oh yeah, I used to drink and we were in this fraternity. I was like, what'd you really learn out of it? I do what I do now. It's like, but what you do now is the same thing I'm doing. And I've never, I wasn't into school for 7 years. And it's like, I went to school because the whole factor of I didn't know what I was going to do next. I was like, all right, I took a year off. I don't like working 2 jobs. I would like to get a better career down the path. I don't know what I truly want to do yet. And this is a start. At least it keeps me thinking until I do reach that point. It's why so many people switch.
That gives you a purpose and a drive and a reason to kind of stick it out to that finish line of the diploma, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's like, but also it's like people change their degrees constantly, especially when they're going towards their years, because they're finding out who they truly are by learning and diving into more realms of things in the education system. Whether it's, my one buddy went to school for getting his his bachelor's in exercise science, and ended up switching it to something with another thing with health and fitness, then ended up switching it over to philosophy. Then he ended up switching it. Then he ended up doing something with something. Now he's in the Army flying Blackhawks and stuff. I'm like, what were you planning on? He goes, dude, you don't know the feeling you get when you're flying at night in a giant US military freaking helicopter with night vision goggles on. I'm like, and what did you go to college for in the first place? Oh, I wanted to be an exercise science major because I got really into working out. I'm like, but you went like someone slapped you and you did a 180 turn and freaking ran the other way. And like, he does that now and he loves it. He's like, I think I just didn't know what I wanted to do, but I had an idea because I was addicted to something in that moment. And like, it's the same thing I can chalk up to watching Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey. Like, that movie fucked me up on space for like 2 weeks. I didn't know anything was real. I was like, oh my God, like there's a planet out there, you get stuck on it. And next thing you know, 7 years passes an hour there. And then it's 7 years here. I'm like, oh my God, like, can you believe that? Like I got into a fascination with space. And then I was like, but that's not me. That's just an impact, from like a movie. You see a dramatic movie play in front of you, you're thinking about that fucking movie. Like, you watch Lone Survivor, yo, you want to sign up for the military as soon as you leave the theater. You're like, I'm ready to go fight for this country. I am America. I was not born here. I don't care, but I am American. And like, it was a whole giant propaganda act. But I'm like, you get influenced by so many things, but they're not the real thing you really want to do. They're just something that's got a hold of your brain. It's got you grasped for some short amount of time. Same thing with fascination. You see, wow, he just won an Emmy. I could do that. Imagine people wanting me. Then you have a fascination with diving into acting. Take 2 weeks in it. Don't change your whole life in preparation for that. Do a temp. Like, dip your toes in the water. Don't go head first into the shallow end, because you don't know where your bottom with that is. You might dive into it and then a week later be like, oh, I don't want to do this. Wait a minute. I just spent how much money into it? Well, if I back out now, then you end up getting screwed. You end up getting set into something you don't want to do. You know what I mean?
I do, and there is part of that. I think that's one of the benefits of college. Honestly, is going through some version of that process. I mean, my college journey was not quite as wasn't quite that. It was major wise. I moved through history and political science to just history. I stayed pretty stable throughout on major. My journey college wise was really more religious in nature, figuring out, okay, I'm Baptist when I got here. There's all these other people that are from all these other Christian denominations. Which one is true? Is any one of them true? Can they all be true? Like, how does it work? And I kind of cycled through a bit of time thinking, well, maybe Greek Orthodoxy, maybe Catholicism, maybe Presbyterianism. Nope, I'm back around to Baptist, and now I know why. But I think there's a lot of value, and other folks have that with different areas in life, where college is sort of this space where you really have the time, and whether it's through family resources or through debt, you have the financial freedom to kind of figure things out for a season. One of my favorite philosophers is a guy named Michael Oakeshott. He's a 20th century conservative thinker over in England. And he's got this great essay called The Idea of a University, where he talks about the real value of college, which for the English, they just call it all university. But university, he says, is all about that he calls it the space of an interval. It's an interval before all of the practical necessities of life creep in, and you can explore whatever you darn well please. So for Oakeshott, it doesn't matter what your degree is or whether it's going to be practically useful or not. But he says one of the biggest benefits you get through going through this kind of, I'm going to flirt with this idea, I'm going to check out this idea. He says it doesn't necessarily make people good. College doesn't really do that, he doesn't think. What it does do is it does give somebody a certain amount of confidence of what they have actually come to a conviction about by the end of college.
It's like coming full circle.
Basically. And it kind of like, if you kind of move on, well, this freshman year, I think I'm going to be a psych major. And sophomore year, I kind of go anthropology. And really by junior year, I've settled on sociology. And I just kind of stick with sociology all the way through. For Oakeshott, he looks at that and says, really, that's okay. Because what you've really figured out is that through you're really interested in sociology. And the real value there is that you're not going to be suckered by just every whim and fad that kind of blows across your radar. But you've really kind of figured out something essential that you are interested in, and you've studied it at some deep level. And through this process, it's not that you'll never be fooled. I mean, there are plenty of idiots who have college degrees. But going through the process of getting through a degree of accomplishing this thing prepares you to be a little more intellectually fit for the rest of life.
A little more set in ways. I can chalk it up, like, just so you see, I'm not just nodding my head, like kind of half paying attention. No, I did in most of my school years, but I actually understand. I can chalk it up to the same realization as when people move out from, like, I'm born and raised in this town. I move out and go experience. You end up, most of the time, they end up moving back home to where they were originally from. It's all coming full circle. Education, like college, it gives you so many realms that you can learn and experience for yourself. I think what makes knowledge power is experience, learning other things from other people. I'm not religious per se, but I understand it. I understand why people can believe in it. I understand because I've heard stories and their convictions of how they're so set that they know there's an end. I don't know. It would be nice if there was, but who's to say God's not a 40-year-old guy on Mars jacking off in socks with Crocs on? I have no clue. It's that evidence is out there. We could come from Mars. Hell, the Earth could be flat. I don't know. Scientology is the only one I find bullshit in. But like at the same time,
We might need to come back for a follow-up conversation about why there is evidence to say that everything you just said is ludicrous, and we can say that with certainty. But that might be a whole nother conversation for another day.
But like I said, I always fight devil's advocate mostly because even if I agree on something, I still have to look at another perspective side of things. I think when you look a lot one way on a lot of things, you get set in a mindset of what the world should be like. And then you're very, very closed off to anything new, any new perceived information. I started podcasting because I realized people have stories to tell, people have thoughts. I might change my own way of thinking. And I can never truly better myself without trying to experience and understand as much as I possibly can. It's not focused on arts or literature or any of these types of things, but what people are interested in. I can learn more from you having a conversation with me than me reading something and feeling like I'm being speeched, only because I have a problem with authority. So I work with my little detriment in a way. My fact is, to truly be like with college, people always trying to decide about what they're doing and stuff. It gives you the resource to try and decipher what you truly want to do. If this is actually what you want, or is this just something that's glorified in your head in a certain way? And when you get the other perspective, or you hear the true believer of that somebody is going to actually achieve that, is when you tell them how low of a percentage chance you had to actually get it completed. Then you see their drive if they keep it going. My whole family was like, you're not fit for college. Nobody in our family went to college. You're not going to college. The fact they told me you're not college material, I was like, fuck it. I'm going to college. And I got my degree. I had that drive because I realized somebody telling me not to do something, or somebody telling me I can't do something, I had to look that deep within myself to be like, can I truly try and aspire that? And let me try and put a little bit of effort into it and see if I can do it. And I did it. I think the same thing chalks up to what you were kind of saying, like trying to find out what you want and being able to experience many different things. College is a whole different scenario from basic K through 12, only
Oh,
because you have
really
your car keys in your pocket. You don't feel trapped. If you want to go, like, you can go. You don't have to raise your fucking hand to go to the bathroom anymore. I remember the first time I did that in my first college class. You got a question? No, I need to use the bathroom. It's like, how old are you? I'm 20, 21. Okay, then go. Like, what are you doing? Like, just, you know what I mean? As soon as they said that, I was like, oh shit, you're treating me like I'm your like adult. I'm an adult. Thank you. I'm a sir now instead of being a kid. I go to the grocery store. The kid goes, paper or plastic, sir? I'm like, when the fuck did that happen? You know what I mean? Like, you're wondering, and I'm
That,
like,
that's I remember when I had that. It was a little late. I think I was 26, 25 or 26. My wife and I had just gotten married. We were at church one day, and there's a guy at our church named Scott Forney. He's a farmer out here, dairy farmer, and they've got 5 kids. And he introduced me to one of his kids as Mr. Herring. I was like, whoa, no, 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 call me Josh. And Scott was like, no, no, we teach our kids to call all adults by Mr. or Miss or Mrs., as the case may be. And that at least was when I had that same kind of moment, like, wait a minute, this is real. I'm one of the adults now. I'm not just one of the college kids, or one of the youth kids, or one of the youngins. For this 8-year-old, I'm Mr. Herring. And that was a moment. That was something
you
else.
talked earlier about 12-year-olds having some type of like problems and some types of like inflated little bit egos when it comes to like they don't even know what the real world problems are. You really think about that when you're like my age and you ask somebody like, what do you want to do when you're an adult? Oh, wait a minute. When does that well, aren't we technically adults? We like to go out and drink and party and stuff. And we like to, nobody telling us what to do, but we always say to each other, what are you going to do when you grow up? It's like, we already consider ourselves grown up until we trying to find out what we truly need to do to survive. I was like, so when does that start? When do we start focusing on like, oh, I'm not doing what I want to do? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're grown up. Now you have to turn the question into, so what do you want to do with your life? And then that hits you even deeper than what do you want to do when you grow up, because you still feel like you got a little bit of time until that day comes. But then you start to realize shit like, oh, I need to suffice for my own now. I'm 40 years old. I can't be living with mommy and daddy forever. I can't be playing video games as much as I want. I haven't set my goals out in my life to be able to do that yet, because I haven't decided to venture into anything.
See, I think the one thing I'd probably push back on there is that I don't think adults do get to do whatever they want. I mean, I think if anything, I think actually my students have a lot more freedom than I do. And in part, that's because I've freely chosen a whole bunch of responsibilities. Because I'm married, I have responsibilities that I owe to my wife. Because I own a house, I have responsibilities I owe to my neighbors and to my city. As a teacher, and I have responsibilities that I owe to my job that are laid out in my contract and spelled out by my boss and all those things. But also I have responsibilities that I think I owe to my students that go beyond what's actually ever formally laid out. And I mean, as a church member, I have responsibilities. As a believer in Christianity, I have responsibilities that go to God and to other people. I have all these different responsibilities that I think are all true and are all good. But I just think it's interesting that I would view adulthood as really, I am increasingly moving into circles that I choose. But in doing that, what I'm actually doing is I'm accumulating more responsibilities. And so it's with age only. It's not really freedom in this sense of I can do whatever I want, kind of like Simba in the early parts of The Lion King. It's not that. I just want to be kings. Kings can do whatever they want. And Mufasa looks at him and is like, that's not what being a king is all about.
No, you have many laws and things you have to abide
Yeah,
by. It's also
really freedom. I think freedom is actually a lot more about freedom to do the right thing. And which
yeah,
means there's a lot of ways in which we end up we might be offered a choice. And in that choice, if we choose badly, we're actually giving up freedom. One of the things that I covered in my class with, you mentioned Aristotle earlier. We just finished reading a section from Aristotle's book, The Nicomachean Ethics, in my philosophy class last week. And he talks there about how really the best way to be a human being is to think about what is it that human beings do excellently. And when we are living when we are living excellently in all of these ways that are unique to us as human beings, well, in that case, we're happy. In which case, that means that all of a sudden, like, that made me take back. I was like, wait a minute, that means happiness is connected to me actually living well. And what is he goes on to explain, he thinks human beings do certain things really, really excellently. And that when when we live governed by reason, then we're actually pursuing happiness. And he makes this big distinction. There's one thing there's pleasure that enslaves and corrupts us. When we get addicted to certain pleasures, that actually makes us less excellent. It corrodes us. It's like acid being dripped over a battery. It's like it makes us less good than we are. But instead, if we are governed by virtue, then we're actually living really, really well. And that just took me back. I was like, it'd been a while since I thought about that.
I had to look that one up. I was like, yeah, it's apparently our standard interpretations of it is that habit is a good life. That's what he believed in, that habit was good life. I was like, but you have, like, when you have a job, you have responsibilities you take on. Everything you do takes on responsibilities. I think a lot of people lose the idea of what they have to do. Whether they get a goldfish, they forget to feed it. You have a responsibility to take care of a pet, not that you're going to buy it. You know what I mean? I wasn't saying that people doing what they want or truly trying to be free is not having responsibilities. You have responsibilities for a reason. You are going to starve to death if you do not eat. That's a responsibility you have as a person. You understand that, you're born with that. When you start taking on many different things, Bill Gates has so many responsibilities. Even though he has so much money, he's constantly still innovating and trying to make even more. The whole factor is he takes on multiple things at once and projects at once. Your life is a project. Your life is constantly building. Da Vinci said it best: art is never done. It's just left unfinished, because he believed you can constantly work at something to finish it. The Mona Lisa was never finished. He was quoted saying that. Now you understand that, and you look at people. Take that same realization into people. The foundation of people, you're a constant work in progress all the way to your very end. It never truly stops. And I think that's what I think people need to realize. Like, you can't just be satisfied with your life, because there's always something you can improve. There's always something you can do to make on better. And realizing when you're becoming something And when you truly are something, you have responsibilities and you cannot lose hold of them. Donald Trump's supposed to be running a nation, even though people talk shit on him all the time. It doesn't matter. He has responsibilities and things he actually has to sit down and do. He has to watch TV 8 hours a day. He also has to drink 32 Diet Cokes a day. He also has to make sure that Jon Stewart isn't tweeting about him. He has responsibilities to himself because that's the way he plays it. He plays this outlandish figure that gets all the publicity and all the news because he likes people talking about him because you're mentioning the Trump name. He likes that. Whether it's good or bad, he doesn't see publicity in that factor. You look at people, whatever venture you take forth and whatever you decide to do with your life, you have to understand that there is responsibilities you need to be upholding as well.
I think there's a lot of value there, and I'll at least take a risk and stick up for President Trump for just a moment. I think he's done there's plenty of things that he has done really badly, and I would chalk his Twitter feed up as the first on that list. But I think there's also a ton of things he's done really, really well, and I didn't vote for him, but I'm planning on voting for him in the upcoming election if he does in fact run, in large part because he is the only presidential candidate that in my lifetime at least, who has actually fulfilled the promises that he made on the campaign trail. And which I find pretty surprising because the things that people get really upset about him for, insensitive comments, potential racism that really is hard to prove, but it's really easy to accuse him of, those sorts of things. Policy moves that we have limited information about, but again, it's really easy to then act as if we have full information about. Those are all, but everything else that people are legitimately upset about him are the same things that came out in the campaign trail. He's only been himself, and people are very upset about him. But he's also fulfilled a lot of his campaign promises, which I find very respectable.
I usually try and stay away from politics a little bit just because of the factor is I think with Trump, like every president, nobody did it right. Nobody does it right. I took it up to Joe Rogan's bit, his joke about the president being for a man or a woman. It's a ridiculous job for anybody. I think you have one person in governing so many people. There's always going to be hate. Hate is going to hate. Yeah, it's just going to happen.
Have you seen those memes where it's I've seen the one with it's got Bill Clinton, W. Bush, and Barack Obama. And for all three guys, it's when they take office at the beginning of 8 years and then how much they age over those 8 years.
Their hair is white as shit and they looked like they were beat up in 2 years.
Ages people.
It's so much to like you're okay. You're a person, you feel like you got a handle on your life. You feel like you're successful. You feel like you could take on more responsibility. You get a dog. You feel like that dog's accomplished. You end up with your girlfriend. Usually that's the first test before you have a kid is you get an animal. See if you could try and keep it alive. Then you dive into a child. Now you get a whole nother responsibility.
People really think this way?
You don't think that?
Oh, no, I would never get a dog as a test of whether I'd have a baby. First off,
I'm
going to get relationships before I'm going to have a kid.
I know so many relationships where they test with a dog first. If you look that up, it's a common statistic.
Your dog can die and it's not the worst thing ever. When you have a child, you're never going to treat it the way you treat a dog.
The weird thing is,
not a test.
People, like if you look that up, there are relationships where
people do that. I know people do that.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely atrocious.
I mean, I can see like I said, I have to fight both sides. I see where that's ridiculous. Like the dog is a different responsibility from a child, but also that if you can handle that, it tests the relationship to see if you can care for something together and see where it would go to. Usually they do that for like a year or so, and then they end up diving into the kid realm. Like that's what my brother and his girlfriend did. They ended up having a dog for like a couple of years. They ended up having a kid later when it eventually accidentally happened. Now, not throwing it out to him, but I'm saying like they do very well with that child. She's a teacher in a public school teaching third grade below, like usually like third or second grade. And she's very like does stuff with him where I see it and I'm like, holy shit, I wish someone would have done that with me. Like she incorporates, we live by the beach. She gets sandboxes and different things of water and like, clean your toy off when you bring like different things and does experiments with him. Like, and I'm seeing him like he's way ahead of a lot of kids that are his age. I'm like, holy crap, he's only 2 years old and he's already doing so much. Like, I don't know the whole span of that because kids freak me out a little bit, at least little small ones. I feel like if I pick them up, I'll break them. And
They're
It's
more durable than you'd think, but
yeah, you drop them, their head just fucking flat head now because their heads are like Jello or Play-Doh. Well,
that's
I'm like,
true for about 6 weeks. But yeah,
well, yeah, I was cracking a joke, but I mean, the whole fact, like, it's weird to see how people try and chalk up, like, just trying to do something like, a lot of people like choose having a kid because that's something that you're supposed to do. Like, I know a friend's like, oh, isn't it like you're supposed to get a family, you're supposed to get married, you're supposed to, happy wife, happy life. I'm like, what? Like, you were raised on those notions? Like, I've seen the whole scale. I mean, I've podcasted with hundreds of different individuals that have different mindsets, and I try and be open to them all. And I try and, like, I never have an argument. No matter if a conversation sounds good or bad, I don't have arguments. I just think it's conversation. We're not all meant to adapt together 100%. But I think if you don't take the time to see what works and what doesn't, like what you agree on and what you don't agree on, like, you're truly losing the aspect of human nature, which is truly deep down caring about one another. Like, you deep down, and if right now, if there was a terroristic threat that happened and it affected all of us, we would all join together. Race would not matter. That would not be a thing. That was seen 9/11. It wasn't, oh my God, you're a different color than me. Oh, I can't work with you to help put out this fire and save this family. No, it's you came together because you realized, like, oh shit, we're people. Something just happened to all of us. If a giant earthquake just happened right now, and we were in the same house, even though if we were talking face to face, it wouldn't matter that you're in North Carolina and I'm from Maryland. That wouldn't even be a factor. It wouldn't matter that we had different views on education system based on
yeah.
private and public.
So two things there. First, I think it's fascinating that we run very different kinds of podcasts, because mine is literally about a debate. I mean, my podcast is all about argumentation and make your argument. And and we have lots of conversations about those arguments. So I don't see making an argument as antithetical to having a good conversation. I think it matters for us to have good conversation. We actually both have to figure out what we actually think about an issue, and then, from my point of view, at least, that's it lets the listener really decide which side they see as the strongest between two opposed views. But secondly, I'll be glad to send you the article if you have any interest in it. But there's do you know the Brookings Institute? You run into them at all?
The Brookings Institute?
Brookings Institute. They're a think tank up in New York. They do a lot of really interesting societal, cultural studies. And about 18 months ago, one of their scholars put together an article. But I've seen this from various other places, but the Brookings Institute is the most reputable place I've seen this. Literally, how to get wealthy in 4 easy steps. Step number 1, graduate from high school. Step number 2, get a job. Step number 3, get married. And step number 4, if you are going to have children, do it after steps 2 and 3. This guy he looked at like literally 50 years of economic data. What do people who make it economically all do? Well, the ones who make it economically, they go through life in that order. So you mentioned the people who have this kind of view, like, oh, you're supposed to just have a family and so on. I don't know that we could have a whole nother discussion. In my case, it would turn into a debate, because this is something I'm going to feel
I don't believe that, though. I don't believe that, because I know Sarah Silverman doesn't have kids, and she's pretty famous and pretty rich, so she's successful. They're successful.
Yeah, but she didn't have kids before she got wealthy.
She doesn't have kids at all.
Now there's exceptions, but again, we're talking about the average. What's the average? What do normal people do? Normal people, if they're going to build wealth over a lifetime, marriage is the traditionally upheld and now economically proven. It is the best way to multiply income. And the trick is that a lot of people they'll have kids before they get married or never get married. And what that ends up doing is eventually the couple splits, and either someone is begrudgingly paying child support or alimony payments out of that, or that child is raised on one income with an absent parent. Instead, within marriage, you end up multiplying the economic factors there, solidifying your cost and multiplying your income potential. And then you have two adults who are committed to then raising this child. And it ends up having this real hard to explain multiplication factor in effectively building wealth over a lifetime. Now, I'm happy to go down a totally different route if you want to get into it. We could also talk about why marriage and children should go together on a religious or theological note, but we don't have to do that. I think we can leave it on the level of economics. Economically, it makes total sense to get married, commit to each other for a lifetime before you begin an 18-year minimum plan of raising a child. Because
Yeah.
having a
Well,
baby
that's
is
just
a 6-month commitment. That is an 18-year minimum commitment.
yeah,
And
that's
you
just an
say,
but that hold on, that's an understanding of a religious side too, which I'm understanding that whole view of it too, which I'm not saying isn't wrong. Like I haven't said that you before you get married you should get a dog and then have kids. I wasn't saying that. I was saying it's just that's what some people think.
sure,
With my mind, I think you should have a comfortability factor with someone and understand that this is something that needs to happen. Obviously, I'm also taking into account with studying psychology of different environments and different influences that people do experience, such as shit happens. And next thing you know, I mean, you're going to have sex unless you're some type of religious person that chooses to wait until marriage. But at the same time, at least today's society standards, you have to take in consideration that's not a thing. People are experiencing that sexual arousal, all those types of things, and not waiting until they get married to do it. You know what I mean? And the factor they have to chalk into, like you said, taking up responsibilities. You have to understand that condom's not, it's like Germex. It only works 99.9% of the time. So there's still that 0.1 motherfucker that gets through. And next thing you know, you're dad. Now, when that happens, that is difficult, but I think you definitely should have a good structure with the person. Whether it's like I know people that have been in a relationship for 7 years, then finally decided to get married, and then they've went 2 years into their marriage and decided to have a kid because they were together a total of 9 years. And they said like having that good background with the person gave me the best advice. Like my great grandfather, who was married for 75 years, told me one of the smartest things I've ever heard when he chalked up to marriage. He said, you know, it fades. I'm like, what do you mean it fades? He goes, it's not about being madly in love with them for every single moment of every single day of your life. People see that, and then when it fades away, they get scared and realize they don't want to be with this person anymore. That's not what it is. It's about finding someone you connect with on a level where you don't mind, like you understand that it fades away, but you understand like you like this person. Like it's, you bonded with this person. You feel connected with this person. Imagine a year without them. Imagine a month without them. Are you going to miss them? Okay, then. And I heard that, I was like, damn, like, how'd you get to that realization? He goes, because I found my best friend. And he ended up dying 6 months later after his wife died at like 94 years old. And I'm like, but seeing that and that true caring, like there wasn't the whole thing of like, oh, he held the door open because he was connected with her. It was his best friend. And I was like, that's what it has to be. It's about having a good structure and deciding if you're ready to take that step together. I think a lot of people see like, oh, we're madly in love, let's have kids. No, that's not. That's because let me tell you, that fades away. It lasts probably a total of 3 years. That's before or after marriage. If you get married right on the spot, it doesn't matter. It only lasts usually estimated 3 years. And then it goes away. But you have to understand it does go away. It's about making connections. It's not 50-50. It's 100-100. You got to be together. I've podcasted with people that have wonderful marriages and seem to make it last. And I've also podcasted with people that have terrible, crappy marriages that it hasn't worked 3 or 4 different times. And I think that's the whole perspective of the person and what they were kind of raised by too. Your influence impacted a lot of what your childhood development. I'm a big time believer on impact, cultural, all that childhood stuff all goes into something that you turn up into today.
I'm trying to think of what to say in response to that because that was like 8 different topics in one go there. That was
Mine's like a river, dude. I'm like Alex Jones. I got so many things. I have
yep, yep.
ADHD, so it's like damn.
I mean, I think the big thing I think I agree with what your grandpa said, your great grandfather says there. I mean that makes a lot of sense to me because the initial attraction certainly does fade away within marriage, and I mean, and that's part of why I would say no, people actually should not have sex outside of marriage because sex is ultimately a life uniting act. And it is the purpose of sex as much as people try to put things in place to prevent the purpose from being fulfilled. The purpose of intercourse is procreation. So, I mean, whether you're talking condoms or you're talking birth control, people find all kinds of ways to try and work around that. It is still a life uniting act with the intention of creating a new life. And I think the traditional structure that society has had time out of mind, literally as far back as we have interactions with, or we have records of human existence, you have two competing views. On the one hand, there is the standard social principle throughout every human culture that you do need to get married, that marriage is valuable, marriage is the place for kids. At the same time, you do have plenty of people who always find other ways to express sexual desires outside of marriage. And one of the things I thoroughly enjoy tracing through literature is that one of the moral principles that seems to keep showing up in various parts of traditional literature is that when you have sex outside of marriage, it becomes this dangerous force that can easily destroy people's lives. And it creates all kinds of chaos. So I think I'm picking up on maybe one or two threads in the river that is your mind, and I may not be addressing ones you were really emphasizing a
No,
lot.
that helps a lot because I'm
trying to suggest here that since we've gotten onto this topic, you can put me in the category of folks who would say, yeah, that whole domain of life definitely belongs inside of marriage, and that's ultimately necessary for people to be happy and flourish. And there's all kinds of fascinating economic data supporting that.
I think the main way I'm trying to highlight what I was trying to say was the fact that, like, you don't think that's the norm nowadays, do you?
Oh, no, it's not the norm.
Okay, because hold on.
This fading away is hugely detrimental to
Yeah.
modern life. Like that's harming. People are harming themselves through following the dictates of the sexual revolution, and they no longer realize that they're doing so.
Well, I think a lot of times, like, you got to look at it from a couple angles here, where you see it as the first side. People don't feel like they're structured into something. A lot of people, at least nowadays, don't feel like having, like, kind of me, a little bit problem with authority. But, like, when it comes to Christianity, you have to be married, you have to have kids that way. But also you have to look at, like, you're a church man. Are you Christian or Catholic?
I mean, well, my Catholic friends would be very quick to remind me that Catholicism is a kind of Christianity, but I'm Southern Baptist by denominational affiliation.
Okay, well, like, even nowadays, Christianity is not becoming the main dominant religion anymore, like how it was seen back in the days. Like, Catholics old, but at the same time, Christianity,
It is the largest global religion.
yeah, like, but you look at, like, Christianity used to be, like, crazy big, like, everyone was a Christian. Now you're seeing more diverse where people are more atheist. I feel like the fact that, like, people get, at least nowadays, where I'm chalking up for society today. I'm not saying that's the standard gold thing, but I'm saying I'm seeing a lot more popular rise now that people are feeling like they're pushed into a corner, and they feel like that's what is like religion is doing. So they feel like they need to go explore other options, where you're seeing higher rises in religion and different things of that sort. The common narrative, though, you surrounding yourself with the same religious group people is going to make you think at the same time that you need to be, what I'm saying? I'm trying to say it's all about someone's environment. I'm trying to hit it from that angle.
Yeah.
Your environmental influences. I've talked to someone that's into the paranormal that says that she believes that, everyone's psychic and all this stuff. Like, everyone has an ability. I'm like, that can be true. But also, I don't know too many psychic people. You know what I mean? I don't know too many people that is relevant today. I know, like, maybe a small group of, like, people I see on TV. She goes, well, I know so many psychic people. I'm like, but you don't understand. That's the group you choose to surround yourself with. If you think, like, if you roll with the goth kids in school, you're going to think everybody is goth. Like, what the?
Right.
Like, so that's what I'm saying.
Now, couple thoughts there. And one of the things I learned when the first time I taught my logic class was that one of the biggest logical fallacies is called oh goodness, I'm forgetting the first word, but it's ad populum. There's another word in the Latin phrase, but it's the appeal to the masses. One of the big principles that logic establishes, or at least in the logic textbook I teach establishes, is that the appeal to what people currently think is completely separate from what is actually true. Those two things might be the same thing. Everybody might agree that gravity works, in which case gravity works is a true statement. But the fact that people agree with it has nothing to do with whether or not gravity is true as a framework for explaining our attraction to the earth below us. Now, I raise that because I do think it's significant. I think you and I are coming at this from two different points of view, and I just want to highlight that.
That's
Not
awesome,
really
though, that we can do
right.
that.
One is not one. I think mine is correct, obviously, but that's what everybody does, right? Everybody thinks their perspective is correct. So I at least recognize that might be my own bias. I mean, but I'm coming at this whole thing from assuming that there is something out there called truth, and that there are things that are true, and that there are and if that's a correct statement, if that is in fact the reality that we inhabit, that truth exists and there are things that are true, well, then that means there people might be wrong about what they think. Because I would go on, I mean, I would say that the friend you're describing, or the interviewee or conversation partner you're describing, who says everyone is psychic, I mean, like, there's a sense in which I would say, yeah, of course, everyone has a psyche. Everyone has a mind. They have a soul. They have thoughts and so on. But if you were going to say everyone has extrasensory perception, or everyone has the ability to empathically intuit other people's emotions or slightly foretell the future, I'm going to say that's hogwash.
Yeah, I told her, I was
Everyone
like, I said, it's probably the groups you surround yourself with.
Well, see,
I
that's the
I
thing.
have a
That's
belief
hold on.
in that.
That's it. That's the main piece I wanted to get to, because I don't think it's all environment. I mean, it can't be all environment, because
It's
if you're going
genetic
to
too. It's
all
genetic.
environment,
Yeah.
that removes anyone's ability to actually say anything is true. Because if I was going to say, well, look, education is important, would you agree with me that education is important?
Yeah.
Okay, well, in that case, then that's a meaningless statement, because apparently by your approach, what we're both saying is that we're both surrounded by an environment that has told that to us, which I think is nonsense. We both
That's
need
kind of
to
my background
that
for it, though.
an environment. I agree with you that environment matters, but I don't think you can dismiss what anyone says just because, oh, that's the environment you surrounded yourself with.
Well, like I said, I wasn't dismissing it and I wasn't chalking it up to that. I also said you have to look at many different factors. Said that before I said the environmental thing. I said that's one of many, whether it goes into your genetics, whether it goes into your background, whether it goes into whatever you're interested in. It's all influenced by something. It's either in your DNA, it's either in your childhood development, it's either in your environment. I was trying to look at her side of it, being like, you surround yourself with like-minded people that have psychic abilities, considering you say you have them yourself. I know some people that have been able to point out a body somewhere, and I know that person never murdered the fucking person. And
Sure.
Hearing that, I'm like, is it just another frequency? Like I said, I try and be as open-minded as possible and try and understand as much as possible.
But the trick here, I'm trying to figure out. And I think this is the key difference between the two of us, and it's coming out in this conversation, which is fascinating. I think is that
You're bringing out the debate side of me.
Well, good. That's
You're doing it.
That's good. I think it's vital that people actually be limited in their open-mindedness. Here's what I mean by that. That I think open-mindedness is important as long as you are open-minded in the sense of a door that you can open. So think with me about the framework of a house. A house has walls and it has structure, right? But there are doors that let us in and out of the house. I can open up the door to my mind and I can let in a new idea and I can interrogate it and I can piece it together and I can decide, yes, I accept this or I reject this. But at the point where I am so open-minded that I accept everything and the possibility of everything, what I've actually done is basically blown out all of the structural support of my house. And I'm no longer able to close the door on a bad idea, on a false idea. So I think what we have in play is that you're representing a far more open-minded stance, and I'm representing a less open-minded stance, with willingness to say open-mindedness matters, but that I'm going to say I want to hold tight to what I think is true, and I'm going to evaluate new stuff by what is true.
You want to stick inside your kind of yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, you're sticking inside the, like, what you would, I guess you could say, the comfort zone, because you know what is real and you don't know if that is real. So you're not going to be open to what you feel like is not real. You know what I mean? Like it's like a fantasy story. Me, I try and be as understanding as possible because you don't want to reject anybody's beliefs or notions, especially when you talk up to religious. You could say God exists, but I can tell you 100 different experiences where I've never even met God. I've never come into some realization with that. But I also think that can be influenced so many different things. One day you could see a butterfly, like I saw a butterfly one time. I almost get hit by a car. I'm like, oh shit, that butterfly just got missed by a car. And I just had a religious experience because I just realized that's all of us floating through life right now. We're just getting missed by that car. And if that butterfly would have been hit, I would have chalked it up to, well, that's fucking life. But at the same time, the fact that some people see when the birth of their child happens, realize there is a God, whether it's like a random coincidence or random something or experience. Some people don't experience that. Some people don't believe that, have that out there. But I believe when I'm trying to be open-minded as possible is understanding that I think we're all getting a piece of the big picture, religion, everything. Like I'm an ordained minister under the Church of Bacon. That's right. I said the United Church of Bacon. And the whole reason is I did it at my Maryland courthouse. Took me an hour and 45 minutes. You laugh at that coming from yeah, I'm dead serious. I have a diploma for it. I will send you a the whole idea was I couldn't do it. And I started on my first podcast. I used to do a spinoff of this series called Fill in the Blank, where you focused on parody religions. It's to highlight the ridiculousness of following one religion, where you might see different on that. But I was full belief like you were, like Pastafarianism. They worship a giant flying spaghetti monster. I was like,
about those guys.
I was like, let me dive into this nut job case. And then I dived into it. I was like, oh shit. It's someone taking something and finding a deep meaning to it. The same reason I can take
that was literally the spaghetti monster was concocted by a group of atheists to make fun of religion. Like it's intentionally a satirical thing.
It wasn't. It was founded by a freaking 20-year-old from Harvard in like 2006 that was supposed to highlight the idealistic notions that teaching a certain religion in school scenarios or abiding by a certain religion in school scenarios was ridiculous. I heard that. I was like, oh shit. He's highlighting that not everybody is the damn same. But I said that you could take the same thing with looking at a freaking a pillow and saying, it gives my head a comfortability. And then taking a whole deep down rabbit hole, like you take an inch and then take a mile, that whole thing. I think people do that more often nowadays, which makes me understand more. Like, oh shit, you found a deep meaning to that. I can't knock it because you found comfort in that. I just all about people's comfort.
Just to make sure I'm following you, there are no convictions that people have that you would say are wrong or bad or even dumb.
No, but I'm not going. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying like you're making huge claims on like half of the things I'm saying, but like when it comes to,
I just want to make sure I understand you, because you just told me that a religion that was founded to say that teaching only one religion is dumb is actually a deep, meaningful thing. And it's literally it worships a flying spaghetti monster that is obviously false.
But they actually don't believe that, though. That's the whole factor. They do it to piss off Christians. Like
lies.
Well, I don't believe there's this giant spaghetti monster out there. The same reason they think their heaven is a beer volcano filled with strippers and their hell is a beer volcano filled with strippers with AIDS. It's like the whole complete opposite. But I see the joking manner where they call Pastafarianism, like instead of Passover, it's passed over, like you were passed over a plate of spaghetti. And then if you look at the 10 Commandments, their 10 Commandments is, thou shalt not spend any money on me. Like, don't do it. Treat yourself to pasta dinners and stuff. I'm like, I don't see it, but I see it in a strict society. There's a guy out there who's trying to make the joke side of it. I'm trying to see it from the comedic standpoint as well. My whole thing is I might not believe that. Like, I don't believe there's a Pastafarianism monster out there. I also don't believe that there's a God out there, but I'm open to understanding and trying to interpret that myself. If I do die and I do meet God, I'm going to let him know. Nice to know you existed, and that's cool that you do, and I'm glad that this is something. I'm not just nothingness. But with my thinking, I have not experienced that. What I'm saying is, you gotta be understanding of everyone. You can't just focus on like, oh, you don't believe in God, well then I can't talk to you. No, I'm gonna try and understand the way you think.
Let me try a different one then. Tell me what you would make of this. Like, I mean, are you familiar with phlebotomy?
Not really.
So it's a 19th century scientific theory that says the emotions and experiences that you have can all be explained by the shape of your skull.
That
And
sounds like a little bit of horse shit.
so you are willing to say that that one's obviously false. That one strikes you as being clearly dumb.
Well, like I said, it strikes me as being clearly dumb, but I got to talk to the guy and try and see his reason of thinking for it too.
I mean,
That's my
literally,
whole thing. I don't make just
this was the 19th century. I don't know that there are any of these people left, but they claimed that this was legitimate and serious. They had charts. You can Google these. I mean, if you search for phlebotomy charts on Google Images, they'll come up. And literally based on like, you have a bump right there. He's like, oh yeah, you're prone to rage, aren't you? And these folks went through. They were carnival people. I mean, they were insane. It's dumb.
Yeah, I don't like even you.
True.
You telling me that, like, hopefully I'm clearing up what I'm trying to say. Like, I'm not in belief of that at all, but I will sit there and try and look at that whole factor. But in my head right now, I'm already thinking you were uneducated to basic new discoveries. Now, the whole fact, like the sugar industry, paid off so many businesses and corporations and so many doctors' offices to tell people that if you ate fat, you were going to be fat. Sugar was not linked to fat. Like, but it turns out sugar is linked to that. If you eat too much sugar, have a high intake of sugar, and you're too hereditary, or you don't go out and exercise or something, you're going to get fat. You know, fat is actually good for you. It actually helps with hormonal balance. Like me wanting to go to school for exercise science at first and then ended up diving into psychology, I understand that now. I think it's all about new evidence coming to light. And like I said, when it comes to religion and when it comes to things of this sort, it's very, very difficult because there's not evidence without experience. You don't truly believe something if you've never experienced it. You don't truly have a belief in it if you've never been in a place or been surrounded by it. You know, there's so many factors. I'm not saying there's just one. I'm saying there's so many you have to be open to.
Oh, that sounds like that sounds like a conversation we'll need to finish up another day, because I'm watching the clock, and like all good teachers on Sunday night, Monday is coming. So any last things we should talk about?
Definitely. I want to give you like a minute here to kind of plug your podcast at the end. I don't want to feel like we're, like we're like debating, but at the same time, it's just conversation. It's getting down to trying to understand the other person too.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. I at least feel like I got a better sense of where you were coming from at that. So I found that quite enjoyable. I run a podcast with one of my students. His name is Ethan, and then another student, Noah, does our sound editing, and he also writes the intro and outro beats. We discovered about a month into podcasting that you can't just rip music off of YouTube. Turns out that violates copyright laws. So Noah he writes rap beats, so he puts those together for us. Anyway, the podcast is called What's the Res? That's RES with a question mark. We're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and everything. We do resolution analysis for the resolutions that come out for high school debate. We're part of our school is now part of the National Speech and Debate Association, and they release the Public Forum and Lincoln Douglas resolutions every 2 months. We're also part of the Luddy Debate League with the Coolidge Foundation, and they release a resolution quarterly. So right now we're thinking through the public forum resolution is resolved. The European Union should join the Belt and Road Initiative. So we're looking at a lot of stuff with the EU and China and infrastructure and Africa and debt and predatory debt relationships, all that fun stuff. Lincoln Douglas has two. We've got one on resolve civil disobedience in a democracy is morally justified. The other one is in the United States, colleges and universities ought not use standardized testing to make admissions decisions. So, and then of course the Coolidge resolution, we're getting at one that's dealing with in the state of North Carolina. No, the state of North Carolina should use targeted tax incentives to attract businesses to move to major parts of their operations to North Carolina. So those are the sorts of things that we end up doing episodes on. We also do interviews. We do supplements. We do the occasional one-off spoof episode. Not really spoof, but usually sometimes really dumb stuff comes across my desk, and I'm just like, we can do a podcast episode on this. My favorite of those is we just roasted Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal back when that came out. We read through it. And Ethan and I really discussed it on a logic basis, tried to avoid a clear partisan basis, but that document is just riddled with logical
He
inconsistencies.
already had a believed notion of what it was. It sounded like horse shit from the start.
Oh man, it's so bad and expensive. Like, if someone wants to give me free fertilizer, that's fine, but don't add $1 million of tax burden to every citizen and then say that you're therefore going to get free fertilizer.
I gotta make that paper. It's the same reason we have a death tax. No one talks about that. You gotta pay for shit even after
Oh,
you're
man,
dead.
it's crazy.
Well,
So, if any listeners want to check out our podcast, you can find us. The website is whatstheres.podbean.com. We've also got a premium channel where we host live debates between people, and we record those and then put them up. You can access those for $3 a month or $30 a year. You can find those at whatstheres.podbean.com/premium. So thanks for the opportunity to do a plug, Rob.
no problem, man. Always. I'm always out there. I mean, hey, someone's going to experience something from listening to you. It might get hooked onto it. So you might as well, right? We're all living here together. We might as well, like I said, take an hour to either have a debate or have a conversation with someone. So it was awesome having you, dude. Especially thank you so much for coming out on the podcast. It was definitely an experience, and I loved every minute of it. Even though we didn't agree on some things, but at the same time, that makes interesting conversation too.
It does. It does indeed. I appreciate the chance to come on your show. This has been a lot of fun.